I remembered the exact phase of my life when I started inventing reasons to stay up late, reading emails I did not actually care about. I would sit on the couch downstairs in the dark, the blue light of the laptop illuminating the coffee table, listening to the house get quiet. I would wait down there until I was absolutely sure the bedroom was completely dark and she was asleep. I convinced myself I was just being a dedicated provider. I told myself the market was tough, the quarterly sales targets were aggressive, and a man in his 50s simply does not have the luxury of clocking out at 8 in the evening. I built a very convincing narrative around my own work ethic, but it was a lie. I was not staying up late because of the pressure of my sales territory. I was staying up because I did not want to walk upstairs, get into that bed, and face the fact that I no longer trusted my own body to do what it was supposed to do. Many men are not broken. They are just ignoring the wrong things. We spend decades treating our bodies like heavy machinery that does not require maintenance. We put cheap fuel in, we run the engine hot, we ignore the warning lights on the dashboard, and we assume that as long as the engine turns over in the morning, we are good to go. For 30 years, I lived on airplanes, in rental cars, and in conference rooms. I thought health was just about avoiding a major cardiac event and keeping the waistline somewhat reasonable so I could still fit into a tailored suit. I never gave a single thought to the structural foundation of my body. I never thought about the plumbing, the pressure systems, the deep internal mechanics that actually keep a man functioning like a man. I just assumed that the physical predictability I had in my 30s was a permanent contract. It was not a permanent contract. When things started getting unpredictable in my early 50s, I did what a lot of proud, quiet men do. I panicked in secret. It did not happen all at once. It was a slow fade. The morning predictability was gone. The physical response time was sluggish. The reliability that I had taken for granted my entire adult life had just evaporated, leaving behind this quiet, heavy, hollow feeling in my chest. You start questioning your own vitality. You start wondering if your time as a fully capable man has simply expired. And because men do not talk about this, because we would rather discuss a bad prostate diagnosis with a stranger than admit to our closest friends that we are losing our edge in the bedroom, I went to the internet. I sat in hotel rooms in Chicago and Dallas staring at my phone, looking for a mechanical fix for a mechanical failure. The internet told me to do what every generic health article tells a man to do when the equipment stops responding. It told me to practice stopping the flow of urine when I went to the bathroom. They called it a Kegel exercise. The advice was everywhere. It was treated like the ultimate secret weapon for male performance. Just squeeze that little muscle, they said, and everything will go back to normal. So I tried it. I would stand there in the executive washroom at the airport, squeezing this tiny little muscle, hoping it was the magic switch that would bring my confidence back. It did absolutely nothing. I felt ridiculous. I felt like I was trying to jumpstart a massive diesel truck with a pair of AA batteries. It was completely insufficient for the scale of the problem I was facing. I realized very quickly that trying to restore major hydraulic function by flexing a tiny bladder muscle was a waste of time. But I did not know what else to do, and for a while I just accepted defeat. I assumed this was the inevitable decline of aging. I assumed I was going to have to learn to live with the silent humiliation of avoiding intimacy, of making excuses about jet lag and heavy dinners, of looking at the floor instead of looking my partner in the eye. The turning point for me came from a completely unexpected direction. It had nothing to do with a doctor's office or a men's health magazine. It came from a conversation with a guy I knew who worked on heavy industrial hydraulic systems. We were standing in a warehouse looking at a massive piece of equipment that had failed, and he pointed to the base of the machine. He explained that when the structural housing at the very bottom loses its integrity, it does not matter how strong the main pump is. The whole system loses pressure. He said you cannot hold a high-pressure line if the floor it rests on is compromised. If the foundation is dead, the pressure bleeds out. That was the moment something clicked for me. I realized I had spent my entire adult life sitting directly on my pelvic floor. Decades of sitting in office chairs, sitting on cross-country flights, sitting in traffic on the interstate. I had completely compressed, weakened, and deadened the very foundation of my own hydraulic system. Stopping a stream of urine was never going to fix a dead foundation. I did not need to twitch a tiny bladder muscle. I needed to rebuild the entire structural housing at the bottom of my core. I started reading everything I could find about the actual architecture of the male pelvis. What I discovered completely changed my understanding of how my own body worked. I learned that the pelvic floor is not just a valve for the bathroom. It is the deepest layer of the core muscles. It is the physical floorboard of the entire torso. When that floorboard is sagging, weak, and completely unresponsive, the blood flow to the vital areas is heavily compromised. And if you have more than 50 years on the clock, circulation matters more than pride. Without proper vascularization in the perineum and the pelvic cavity, you do not get strong erections, you do not get control over your own responses, and you do not get your confidence back. I had to learn how to activate a part of my body I did not even know I had. I completely abandoned the useless bathroom trick. Instead, I started practicing a very specific, deeply internal bracing movement. I started doing it on the floor of my living room in Scottsdale, early in the morning before the sun came up and before anyone else was awake. I would lie on my back with my knees bent. It is the easiest position to take gravity out of the equation when you are trying to wake up muscles that have been dormant for 20 years. I would relax my body, take a slow, deep breath in, and then I would brace my core. But I was not just flexing my stomach like I was about to take a punch. I was imagining that I had to physically lift everything at the base of my pelvis upward. It is a strange mechanical feeling to describe, but the only way I can explain what I did was that I tried to pull my testicles up into my body using nothing but internal muscular tension. I imagined engaging every muscle at the bottom of the pelvis and pulling everything up into the pelvic cavity. I was drawing the landing gear up. I was locking the chassis. At first, I felt absolutely nothing. My brain was sending a desperate signal to a muscle group that had essentially been asleep since 1998. It was deeply frustrating. I would lie there on the rug, breathing in, bracing my stomach, trying to pull everything upward from the inside, and nothing would move. There was no connection. The wires were cut, but I am a stubborn man, and I knew the alternative was spending the rest of my life avoiding the bedroom. So I kept doing it. I would pull that internal tension upward, hold it tight for 5 seconds while I stayed braced, and then I would let it drop and exhale. I did it 20 times in a row. I did it every single morning. For the first few days, I was operating completely blind. I was not sure if I was doing it right or if I was just wasting my time staring at the ceiling. But toward the end of the second week, the connection finally woke up. I started to feel the tension exactly where I was supposed to feel it. I felt a deep tightening around the back, I felt a heavy engagement underneath, and I felt a solid structural tension deep inside the front part of the pelvis. I was not just exercising a bladder muscle anymore. I was physically lifting the entire floor of my core against the pressure of my own diaphragm. Once I found that connection, everything changed. I did not just leave the exercise on the living room floor. The beauty of this movement is that it is completely invisible. Nobody knows you are doing it. I started integrating it into my entire day. I would do it sitting in my truck at a red light on Camelback Road. I would do it standing in line at the hardware store. I would do it while I was walking the dog in the evening. I made it a fundamental part of how I moved. Every time I went to the gym and picked up a heavy dumbbell, every time I braced my core to do a squat, I made sure I was simultaneously pulling that pelvic floor up and in. I locked the bottom before I loaded the top. The physical changes did not happen overnight. It was not a cinematic transformation where I woke up one morning feeling like I was 25 again, but the shift was undeniable. The predictability came back. The morning responses, which had been absent for years, started returning with a consistency that genuinely surprised me. The internal pressure system of my body started functioning the way it was designed to function. By rebuilding the structural housing at the base of my core, the vascularization improved, the blood flow returned, and the physical control that I thought I had lost forever was suddenly back in my hands. Confidence returns when the body starts to respond again. It is not more complicated than that. When you know the engine is going to start when you turn the key, you stop being afraid to sit in the driver's seat. The physical restoration was massive, but the psychological relief was what actually gave me my life back. I was no longer walking around carrying that quiet, heavy secret. I was no longer looking at my watch in the evening, trying to calculate how long I needed to pretend to work so I could avoid a difficult silence in the bedroom. My wife, Alyssa, is a very direct woman. She does not miss much, and she does not let me get away with hiding. During the worst of that phase, before we had figured out how to have honest conversations about this, the distance between us was palpable. I had created that distance because of my own shame. When my physical confidence returned, my entire presence in the house changed. I stopped avoiding her gaze. I stopped physically retreating when she walked into the room. The physical fix brought back the emotional proximity that I had been unknowingly sabotaging for years. The change in the bedroom was the direct mechanical result of fixing the foundation. But the change in the marriage, the return of that relaxed, unspoken trust, was the real payoff. I was having coffee a few months ago with a friend of mine, a guy I have known since my early days in corporate sales. He is a few years older than me, successful, tough, the kind of guy who believes that grinding through a problem is the only way to solve it. He looked exhausted. After about an hour of talking around the issue, he finally dropped his guard and admitted that he was having trouble at home. He described the exact same loss of predictability, the exact same quiet panic, the exact same useless attempts to fix it by stopping his urine stream. I did not give him a speech about aging gracefully. I told him exactly what I just told you. I told him his plumbing was fine, but his foundation was dead. I explained the mechanics of pulling the chassis up. I told him to get on the floor and figure out how to reconnect his brain to the bottom of his core. He texted me 3 weeks later. It was a short message, just acknowledging that the engine was firing again. You could feel the relief through the phone. You are not the only man dealing with this. Most of the men you respect are fighting this exact same quiet battle, assuming they are the only ones losing their grip. I talk to a lot of men our age who think their best days of physical confidence are firmly behind them. They look at the changes in their bodies, they look at the lack of response, and they conclude that the warranty has simply expired. They think they need to accept a life of emotional distance, or they think they have to rely entirely on a prescription bottle to feel like a man in their own bedroom. What begins in the body usually ends in the mind. If your physical foundation is weak, your mind will eventually convince you that you are fundamentally broken. But you are not broken. You are just disconnected from your own infrastructure. You have ignored the maintenance on the most important load-bearing wall in your body. You cannot expect the house to hold pressure if the floor is rotting out from underneath it. I am not going to sit here and tell you that a breathing and bracing exercise is a magic cure for every complicated physiological issue a man faces as he gets older. It takes time. It requires you to be honest with yourself about what you have been ignoring. But I am saying that once I stopped relying on a useless bathroom trick, and once I actually did the work to rebuild the foundation of my own body, I stopped having to pretend I was okay. I actually was okay. The control came back. The quiet, lingering shame disappeared. And I can tell you from personal experience that waking up knowing your body still works is a hell of a lot better than sitting alone in the dark waiting for the house to go to sleep.